Hello everyone. We are starting in 2 minutes. Just waiting for some more participants to join in. Myself Shirin, the director for Council for Creative Education. I welcome you all for this webinar on learning differences and creativity. We host this kind of webinars once in a month, mainly towards the end of the month, and we keep you posted about these webinars and events through our Facebook page as well as through our newsletters. So, those of you who haven't subscribed yet to our newsletter, please subscribe to our newsletter to get the updates about these kinds of webinars in future as well. And those of you who have already joined, they are already getting the newsletters. So, I welcome you all for this webinar. Just before we begin our webinar, today's webinar, I would like to take you through the CCE journey in a couple of minutes. So, I will share my screen now with you, and then I will talk about what we do at CCE. Yeah, so here, as you can see, Council for Creative Education is a cooperative research based organization established to promote, educate, and invent in creative pedagogy. So, our focus is on creative pedagogy and how it can be used in the routine education. And we are working with universities, governments, various types of schools, and partner organizations with whom we would like to spread this movement of creative education. As you can see, our goal is to provide an open, student friendly, creative, and quality school environment to the students, which will lead them to holistic personality development and successful life. And we believe that to do this, we need a society, teachers, and support staff. And so, like as it is said that a student learns from the whole village. So we believe in that, and we think that everybody works together to make education as a success. As you can see, our network of collaborators is spread across many countries, including Australia, Indonesia, US, and Africa, and also in Europe here. We are the official member for Education Finland, and it is a program governed by Finnish National Agency for Education under Ministry of Education, Government of Finland. As you can see, we are into different activities like training and workshops, consultancy, conferences and camps, and research and innovation projects. So, just 1 week ago, we conducted our sixth symposium on creative education here in Finland from 12th to 16th November. The theme for the conference was creativity, imagination, and digital technology. We also do different kind of courses and training programs. As you can see here, some of them are online and some of them are on site. This the content is for the diploma in early childhood education, which is starting from the 3rd of December. There are still some seats left. If anybody of you interested can check our web page for the same and enroll yourself in that. It's an online course. We also give the Finnish school experience to the educators from the globe. And as you can see that we have different kinds of uh, things there, and you can read like what we give in that is the observation of the classrooms, meeting the teachers, and then you can also get to meet the students and other experts from the field of education here. Till now, we have received educators from 33 plus countries. We also conduct student camps, which will be announced soon for the summer on our website. So stay tuned. And now we go for today's webinar. So just hold on. Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much for your patient listening. And now I would like to invite my colleague and my CCE's associate from Anguilla, and she's an entrepreneur doing her young entrepreneurship Erasmus program with us. So, Nijeri, I welcome you here and please start your webinar.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's so glad to have you join us today for today's webinar on learning differences in creativity. I am Nijeri Richardson Carty. I am from the beautiful island of Anguilla in the British Caribbean, and I've been here working with the Council for Creative Education since August as a young entrepreneur within the Erasmus program. So again, thank you so much for joining in, and I look forward to our interaction during this webinar. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, so let's just give it a minute. Okay, and we'll jump right in. So again, today we are going to be looking at learning differences in creativity. I'm just going to share a little bit about my background and experience. So as I shared, I am a young entrepreneur. I am actually the Chief Education Innovation Strategist of Branches of Learning, which is a creative education consulting and service provider in Anguilla in the Caribbean. I provide creative consulting services through instructional coaching, professional development, workshops, seminars, and the unconference education experience. Some of the other services that I provide are within the areas of specialized private tutoring services, in-school facilitation, and homeschool support for students from intervention to enrichment. This is a little bit about my education background. I've been in education for over 15 years, having worked with a variety of students and teachers and education leaders around the world. And I'm excited again to be here speaking with you. So just a little bit of information about me and my education background. I am also the founder of Big on Learning, which is a nonprofit organization creating, supporting, and promoting innovative education solutions for students, parents, and teachers in Anguilla. So if you're interested in supporting, you can always go on and learn more about what we're doing to innovate and transform education in Anguilla. Today, we are actually going to be discussing, again, learning differences in creativity. So we're going to take a quick overview of defining learning differences. We're going to look at some myths and realities of learning differences. And then I'm going to share some tips on how you can nurture creativity in learners with learning differences at home and at school. So why? I'm sure you've heard me use the term learning differences. And the reason why I use the term learning differences, like most persons, I prefer learning differences instead of learning disabilities. So, some persons are concerned that the term learning disability focuses on individuals' cognitive weaknesses and isolates them from other learners, while the term learning differences highlights the fact that they simply learn differently than others do. So during this webinar, I'll be using the term learning differences as my philosophy acknowledges the uniqueness of each individual, and one of my mottos is all education is special education. So learning differences, what is it? Okay, learning differences are lifelong conditions that in some cases affect many parts of a person's existence: school or work, daily routines, family situations, and sometimes even friendships and play. In some people, many overlapping learning disabilities may be apparent. Others may have single, isolated learning problems that has little impact on other areas of their lives. But not all learning problems fall into the category of learning disabilities. Many children are simply slower in developing certain skills. Because children show natural differences in their rate of development, sometimes what seems to be a learning disability may simply be a delay in maturation. So, learning differences are disorders that affect one's ability to understand or use spoken or written language, do mathematical calculations, coordinate movements, or direct attention. Although learning differences occur in very young children, disorders are usually not recognized until a child reaches school age. Learning differences affect, again, one's ability to interpret what one sees and hears, or to link information from different parts of the brain. These limitations can show up as specific difficulties with spoken and written language, coordination, self-control, or attention. Such difficulties extend to schoolwork and can impede learning to read, write, or to do math. So let's stop, connect, and reflect. How did learning the definition of learning differences impact your thinking about persons with learning differences? Please drop any comments in the section and we can share and learn from each other. I'll just wait a minute to see if we have any questions coming in. If you don't have any questions, then I'll go ahead and continue, but I'll be sharing my contact information so that you'll be able to reach out if you do think about something in the meantime. Okay, so we'll go ahead and move on. So here's another question. What are your beliefs about learning differences? Again, drop your comments in the section, because we all know that we do and hold some of our own preconceived notions about what learning differences are. And as you'll find out shortly, that can significantly impact the way we interact with students that we find may have learning differences or challenges. So I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to go ahead and continue. So we're going to look at the myths and realities, because all of us, again, have these preconceived notions about what a learning difference is. Okay, so myth number one that persons typically think about with persons with learning differences is that people with learning differences are not very smart. And the fact is, children with learning disabilities are just as smart as other kids. Intelligence has nothing to do with learning disabilities. In fact, people with learning disabilities have average to above average intelligence. Many have intellectual, artistic, or other abilities that permit them to be defined as gifted. So they're twice exceptional. So studies indicate that as many of 33% of students with a learning difference are typically identified also as gifted. A second myth that we typically see or have as preconceived notions is the fact that a learning disability or learning difference is just an excuse for irresponsible, unmotivated, or lazy people or students. But the reality is that learning differences are caused by neurological impairments and not character flaws. So for some people with learning differences, the effort required to get through a day can be very exhausting in itself. The motivation required to do what others take for granted is enormous. Learning differences are problems in processing words or information, causing otherwise bright and capable children to have difficulty in learning. The disabilities involve language, reading, writing, speaking, and/or listening. The next myth typically associated with persons with learning differences is that it only affects children and that adults grow out of these particular disorders. The reality is, it is now known that the effects of learning differences continue throughout the individual's lifespan and may even intensify in adulthood as task and environmental demands change. So sadly, many adults, especially older adults, have never been formally diagnosed. Learning differences cannot be outgrown, but they can be identified reliably in kindergarten or first grade children, or even earlier. So research clearly demonstrates that the earlier a child is given appropriate help for a learning disability, the more successful that child's outcome will become. The fourth myth that I'm going to share with you today that many believe is that learning disabilities are only academic in nature. They do not affect other areas of a person's life. The reality is, some people with learning disabilities have isolated difficulties in reading, writing, or mathematics. However, most people with learning disabilities have more than one area of difficulty. Dr. Larry Silver asserts that learning disabilities are life disabilities. He writes, the same disabilities that interfere with reading, writing, and arithmetic also will interfere with sports and other activities, family life, and sometimes even getting along with friends. Children with learning differences are creative and resourceful, and frequently are characterized as gifted and or alternative thinkers. They're often very smart and typically have strengths and talents that differ from the skills emphasized in school. So with recognition of their difficulties, appropriate help, and the development of their interests and talents, children with learning differences learn to succeed both in school and beyond. Our final myth that typically holds that many persons have preconceived notions about is that more boys than girls have learning disabilities. The reality is, although 3 times more boys than girls are identified by schools as having learning disabilities or differences, research studies show that, in fact, equal numbers of boys and girls have the most common form of a learning problem or difficulty in the area of reading. So many girls with learning differences are neither identified or treated. So we've talked a little bit about the myths within learning differences. Now let's briefly, just quickly overview a few of the characteristics. I'll just share it on the screen for a minute and you can take a look. Many times persons with learning differences or disabilities may not understand what he or she reads. They may struggle to express their ideas in writing. They may have trouble following directions. Sometimes they may confuse math symbols or misread numbers, or they will have trouble remembering the sounds that letters make, or even hearing slight differences between those words. Some persons may not be able to retell a story in the correct order, or they may have trouble with things such as simply learning the alphabet, rhyming words, or even matching letters to their sounds. Again, those are just a few characteristics that persons may see if they're considering that a student or their child may have a learning difference or disability. Some of the common learning differences that I'm sure that you typically have heard about are dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, auditory and visual processing, and nonverbal learning disabilities. So I'm sure that you may have heard of some of those common learning differences before. They are defined on the slide. So we will be digging deeper into those in the future in another workshop seminar series. But that's just an overview of some of the common learning differences that persons typically hear of. So let's stop again really quick. I've been doing a lot of talking. I'd love to hear from you. If you can just share if you have ever experienced working with any of the common learning differences mentioned, or any other learning difference that you are familiar with, or learning disability. Okay, I'll wait to see if I get any responses. Please do feel free to type into the chat. I like to try to make things as interactive as possible. Again, if for some reason you are catching this on the replay and you have questions about this particular webinar, you can most definitely contact me. Okay. So now we are going to jump into the aspect and area of creativity and how that affects learning differences. So when we're looking at learning differences and aspects of creativity, we are looking at aspects of instructional support and needs in order to meet the needs of varied learners. So there are many different things that we want to take into consideration in terms of aspects of creativity when working with students with learning differences. For now, we're just going to briefly consider the nature of exceptionality across the spectrum of learners, and then we're going to think carefully about how special needs can have a bearing upon a child's desire to be creative, and look at 5 ways in which parents and teachers can encourage creative expressions. So when we look at weaknesses and strengths, each individual has areas of strength and weaknesses, and it is incumbent upon adults who live and work with children to strive towards supporting all of the dimensions of their well-being. This includes their social and emotional health, cognitive growth, moral and character development, and more. With that in mind, a person's creativity is a vital part of what makes that person unique. Creativity helps children solve problems and overcome challenges. It fosters resolve, inquiry, new perspectives, independence, positivity, confidence, and ingenuity. Thus, it's important to nurture creativity, yet sometimes that doesn't happen. So what do we do? Certainly, parents and teachers are right to focus on academics, including remediation, accelerated learning opportunities, or other special education programming modifications or accommodations as required, but all that can and should occur while also paying attention to a child's creative potential. So what to do? So as with every kind of learning in any domain, special learning needs can fluctuate and change over time. Supports will vary depending on what the nature of the individual's exceptionality and the recommendations set forth by a child's individual education plan, or sometimes they're called personal learning plans if you're working with a student in the early years, an early intervention plan. But regardless of which placement option or service provision is being implemented at any particular time, there's an inevitable some way that you are able to incorporate opportunities to trigger a child's imagination and creativity. So when I looked at this quote, it really definitely spoke to me. Creativity counts. Creativity develops children's problem solving and critical thinking skills needed to achieve lifelong success. A child who is visually impaired writes a stirring poem, while another who is dyslexic composes a beautiful melody. A teenager who has a learning disability or difference shares futuristic ideas during a discussion. A young child with autism creates a striking collage of photographs. A student who is intellectually advanced draws an original web design that is both insightful and intricate. Each of these special needs learners is stretching in different ways by engaging the mind, extending knowledge, and tapping creativity. It's vital that they and others be encouraged to do so, even if it's challenging. So, even the most academically advanced learners sometimes have trouble identifying what makes them curious or enthused, or conversely, sometimes hesitant and less likely to be creative. Children need a little extra encouragement or assistance in the form of help, reinforcement, or guidance so as to be able to maximize their strengths, talents, interests, energy, effort, and coping mechanisms. Adults have to help children make the right kinds of choices. That is, to take a chance, step outside comfort zones, try new approaches, test limits. This can be difficult for kids who are struggling in various ways. Some may have trouble starting a creative activity, whereas others may find it hard to sustain the momentum and see it through to completion. But patience, choice, reassurance, these are fundamental for encouraging children's creative expression. So it is honoring the validity of children's thoughts and feelings without being judgmental. So when we're thinking about nurturing creativity, my first tip is to help children tap networks of support. Remember that their needs, desires, concerns, and interests are always changing, as are family and school situations. Friends, family members, teachers, coaches, and others can offer incentive, support, and guidance. Children who perceive the adults and others in their lives as being caring, respectful, available, and willing to help are more motivated to exercise their creativity. My second tip for nurturing creativity in persons with learning differences, or any child for that matter of fact, is to consider what will inspire children and spark their imagination. Playfulness, language stimulation, multisensory experiences, and ample opportunities for unstructured play and discovery, alone and with others, can help creative juices flow. Children benefit from exploring a range of different activities such as music, art, puzzles, exercise, dance, and discovery walks. Use of technology, for example, assistive technology, for broader resource access can also be beneficial for students. My third tip for nurturing creativity would, would be to help kids stay balanced. Now, that's hard even for us as adults, but we definitely need to help our students and children stay balanced. We want to ensure that children have a healthy mix of learning opportunities, physical exercise, sleep, reflection, social activities, and family time. Also, meditation, solitude, and quiet time for mind wandering, innovation, and exploration at a leisurely pace. Tranquility can occur both indoors and outdoors. So, adherence to routines can be also very calming. And all of these experiences can definitely stimulate creativity. My next tip for nurturing creativity is to encourage children to have faith in their own abilities. Children experience frustration in both their weaker and stronger subject areas, and by helping children to realize and accept their limitations and challenge their own thinking, including their misconceptions about themselves and their capabilities, is definitely going to be important. Learning about self-talk can also be advantageous. For example, working through the steps of a task and recognizing and imagining positive outcomes, such as saying to oneself, I will try, I can do it, I'm making progress. Remember, too, that although creativity may seem challenging, it can actually be a means of overcoming a challenge. And my final tip for nurturing creativity is to emphasize optimism. A fresh outlook can be empowering, and it can also bolster self-confidence. So another quote that I definitely enjoy is empower children's lives and they will be able to change the world. We want to be able to celebrate steps and accomplishments. It's about attitude. Children can start small and aspire to change hesitancy, reluctancy, or negative points of view if they want to. It also helps to ensure that you set personal goals, IEP goals that are effectively aligned with that child's needs. So when an educational program is well suited, such that a child is progressing and feels positive about learning, it sets the stage for inquiry, meaningful connections, a sense of purpose, and creative expression. So our time is moved quickly and we still have time left. So I'm definitely going to be open for any questions for you to share or ask. One of my final thoughts in regards to learning differences in creativity is that we need to make sure that we give children a strong appreciation for curiosity, exploration, and persistence. This is the foundation upon which intelligence, creativity, success, and fulfillment are built. So at this time, I would love to see if there are any questions that are posted or that have been missed.
Uh, I can see there are few participants who are listening to this and are in the hangout. So, if you want to ask the question, you can just unmute yourself and ask the question so that Nijari can answer you. And otherwise, you can also type the question in the group chat. But whatever is suitable for you, please, you are free to do that. So, you can either way ask it verbally or then you can just write it in the group chat.
If there are no questions from the audience, then I would like to ask something.
And it
It's about, like you mentioned, about dyslexia, dyscalculia, and all those kinds of learning differences. Can you tell us more about it? Like, actually, what happens with those kind of difficulties?
Okay, so when we look at can you hear me? I just want to make sure everyone's able to hear. Yes. Okay. So when we look at the common learning differences in terms of dyslexia, it is a language-based disability in which a person has trouble understanding written words. It may also be referred to as a reading disability or a reading disorder. So typically persons would associate, oh, if my child, they're writing their letters backwards or they're reading and doing those reversals, that's a surefire sign that the student has dyslexia, but it's actually it's not. One of the things with dyslexia is that, of course, early intervention is definitely key. There are some, research shows that the earlier you intervene and provide strategic and systematic support for persons that exhibit those characteristics, then they will have more success in developing some compensation strategies for success in the future. And we know and have heard of many stars and persons that have lived successful and fulfilling lives that have been identified with dyslexia. So many times some may feel that, oh, this is definitely debilitating, but it's not, because again, persons with learning differences do are very intelligent. And so though they may struggle in this particular area, they may be significantly gifted in another area. When we look at dyscalculia, dyscalculia specifically is a mathematical disability in which a person has a difficult time solving arithmetic problems and grasping math concepts. Typically, persons, even though it's common, many persons don't know the name for it. And sometimes when I teach and talk about it, I have to always slow down myself and actually say it, dyscalculia. Okay, when I look at dysgraphia, it's a writing disability in which a person finds it hard to form letters and write within a defined space. Okay, when we look at auditory and visual processing, those are disorders that are around the area of sensory disabilities, in which a person has difficulty understanding language despite normal hearing and vision.
Right. Can you give the examples of this?
So examples of auditory and visual processing disorder. So if the student, um, you're having a conversation, though they may physically actually be able, there's nothing wrong with their hearing, their interpretation, they may just pick up the beginning and the end of what you're saying. And so they may have missed the meat and the meaning in between. And so sometimes they look a little disoriented or confused about what exactly you're asking them to do. Okay. And then one that's very common is nonverbal learning disabilities. So it's a neurological disorder which originates in the right hemisphere of the brain, causing problems with visual and spatial aspects of learning, intuitiveness, students that are struggling to organize their thoughts, their ideas, and be able to process information. And that is actually more common than most persons would actually believe. Okay. So in the future, when we look at doing collaborative on more classes in terms of learning differences, I'll be going more in depth about each of those. What are the target specific characteristics, how you're able to screen for those things, and then refer for future for full diagnosis. Again, being able to identify learning differences early and provide early intervention and support is definitely key to a student's and person's success.
Any
Any
questions?
questions from the audience?
I
Can
can see
see
Mari
Mari
and
and
Lakshi
Lakshi
there.
there.
So please do ask any questions. Are there any questions specifically on creativity? I think some of the tips that we talked about in terms of creativity are not only important for students with learning differences, but for every single, for all children in terms of being able to develop their capacity for creativity, innovation, and imagination. Many times our students are so involved and engaged in technology, and having those opportunities to sit in silence and have opportunities to create and express themselves. Many times they simply just need the encouragement to do that. As I look at the slide in regards to weaknesses and strengths, being able to reflect and help students to be able to reflect on, I'm not so good at reading, but I am amazing at drawing and interpreting maybe what I've listened to. And so giving them that creative output definitely helps to motivate them and helps to keep them engaged in the learning process. So it's very important for students, yes, to be able to recognize their areas of needs, but how can they then use their strengths to empower those areas of need so that they continue to be successful? I'm just going to kind of go back. We went through without any questions, but I wanted to go back and also highlight a few things. And this particular slide, and I know I usually get lots of questions about this slide in terms of what to do, particularly for parents that may be exhibiting, that not maybe exhibiting, but are concerned about their child, and do they have a learning difference, and what do I need to do? Where do I start? How can I help them? Is it a learning difference? Truly, I always encourage parents to get a deeper understanding, and we'll kind of go through within the workshop in terms of what's developmentally appropriate. Even though we may have these developmental milestones, if a child does not hit a particular milestone right within that chart, it doesn't mean that they have a learning difference. We have to look at the child as a whole and how those deficits impact whether their school life, their home life, and in their social life as well. So understanding what's developmentally appropriate, and understanding that it's not just one, but it will be it will be a variety of factors that would need to be taken into consideration. And again, getting the proper assessment, screening, and diagnosis is going to be key, so that you can work as a team with your child's daycare school in order to support those particular areas of needs that are recognized. So I think that is definitely important, and that's definitely an area that parents really question and have a lot of concerns about.
One more question from my side, actually. Uh, yeah, one more question from my side is actually it is always very difficult for the parents to accept that their child has some kind of this learning difference. So, what will you tell to these kind of these parents that what things they should think about or how they should react to this situation? Because there is a lot of pressure from the society and from the family, and then one person is held responsible for this kind of learning difference in a child or something like that. So, not even in this kind of subtle learning differences, leave about the autism or something very serious, but even if they have this kind of problems like dyslexia or dysgraphia, dyscalculia, still they have this kind of pressure. So what do you suggest in this case?
One of the things that I suggest to parents, and I always say, as a parent, you have that natural instinct, and I know that we have the pressures of culture and society, but we also have the pressure of our duty as a parent to do and support and help our child to be the best that they can be. I have worked with parents that, after initial assessment and screening, and they've found that yes, indeed, my child may have a learning difference, disability, or a different disorder. They were ashamed, and they did not want to share with family members. And though there may be a period of denial, and that is completely understandable and acceptable. Again, the early interaction and developing a support team, because then the parent has to, they themselves educate themselves about that particular disorder so that they can become an advocate for their child, and they can communicate and express with others, not just about this deficit, but about all of the other amazing strengths that their child has outside of that deficit. So I like to share with parents and support them in terms of advocacy, and help them to understand the learning difference that their child has, and then also to support them in becoming an advocate and sharing how they can support their child at home and again at school. So I think that is definitely something that is extremely important. So helping them to educate themselves and to understand and not blame themselves for the challenges that their child may have, and become that advocate for them, their number one advocate. Learn more about that particular learning difference, and go through that process with them, because they're going to first have to accept it, then they're going to have to help their child to accept it. And we kind of talked about that in terms of looking at the different ways that you can nurture creativity. In terms of nurturing creativity, creativity in itself is nurturing the child, the natural things that we should do in order to nurture children, to understand who they are as persons, their strengths, and their areas of need. I'm looking to see if we have any questions. I know we have a few persons on. Please don't be afraid to ask any questions. Okay, what I will do is I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. We did make it to the question segment. I'm going to share, and I'm just going to, oops, there we go. See if I can make it to the last slide. Again, all those amazing tips for nurturing creativity. And I just want to thank you so much for joining today's webinar. I look forward again to answering any questions. If you're catching the replay, you can definitely send me an email in regards to any questions on this particular webinar. And you can connect with me through the various social media mediums that you see on the screen. And whether it be Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you can email, you can definitely visit the Branches of Learning webpage to learn more about what we do. And again, as I shared earlier, I'll be releasing in 2019 a series of workshops, particularly focusing on learning differences, with an infusion of creativity focus for instructional strategies. And that will be for not only new teachers and parents as well, but persons that have been teaching and are just looking for new ways to support students with learning differences in their classrooms. But again, it's also open for parents that are looking for support tools to help at home, because I do believe that it is we are a team as educators and with parents and the entire community in order to help our students be successful. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you, CCE, for the opportunity to share a little bit about learning differences and creativity. And I look forward to collaborating and working with you in the future. It's been a phenomenal experience here in Finland. And thank you, and have a great day.
Yeah, thanks to all who joined us today, and you will be able to watch this website still. It will be there for 2 days, so watch it and join us for this webinars as well. We will get posted and take a look at our website. You can also send the questions about this webinar as well to us. We can forward it to immediately. You can send your questions to us at info@ccfinland.org, and then we can pass it on to her admin. So thanks again, and then have a nice weekend. Bye bye.